I've told you before, a woman has been foully murdered. This witness brought the deceased into contact with the last person who saw her alive. We have the right to determine that what this witness's attitude was toward that girl and the Negro. The coroner turned back to Jan. Now, Mr. Alone, didn't you ask the Negro to sit in the front of the car between you and Miss Dalton? No, he was already in the front seat. But you didn't ask him to get in the back seat, did you? No. Why didn't you? My God, the man is human. Why don't you ask me? I'm asking these questions and you're answering them. Now tell me, Mr. Alone, would you have invited the Negro to sleep with you? I refuse to answer that question. But you didn't refuse the drunken Negro the right to sleep with that girl, did you? His right to associate with her or anybody else was not in question. Didn't you try to keep the Negro from Miss Dalton? I didn't. Answer yes or no. No. Have you a sister? Why, yes. Where is she? In New York. Is she married? No. Would you consent for her to marry a Negro? I have nothing to do with whom she marries. Didn't you tell the drunken Negro to call you Jan instead of Mr. Alone? Yes, but confine yourself to answering the questions. But, Mr. Coroner, you imply I'm trying to establish a motive for the murder of that innocent girl. No, you're not. You're trying to indict a race of people and a political party. We want no statements. Tell me, was Miss Dalton in condition to say goodbye to you when you left her in the car with the drunken Negro? Yes, she said goodbye. Tell me, how much liquor did you give Miss Dalton that night? I don't know. What kind of liquor was it? Rum. Why did you prefer rum? I don't know. I just bought rum. Was it to stimulate the body to a great extent? No. How much was bought? 1/5 of a gallon. Who paid for it? I did. Did that money come from the treasury of the Communist Party? No. Don't they allow you a budget for recruiting expenses? No. How much was drunk before you brought the 5th of rum? We had a few beers. How many? I don't know. You don't remember much about what happened that night, do you? I'm telling you all I remember. All you remember? Yes. Is it possible that you don't remember some things? I'm telling you all I remember. Were you too drunk to remember everything that happened? No. You knew what you were doing? Yes. You deliberately left the girl in that condition? She was in no condition. Just how drunk was she after the beers and rum? She seemed to know what she was doing. Did you have any fear about her being able to defend herself? No. Did you care? Of course I did. You thought that whatever would happen would be all right? I thought she was all right. Just tell me, Mr. Alone, how drunk was Miss Dalton? Well, she was a little high, if you know what I mean. Feeling good? Yes, you could say that. Receptive? I don't know what you mean. Were you satisfied when you left her? What do you mean? You had enjoyed her company? Why, yes. After enjoying a woman like that, isn't there a letdown? I don't know what you mean. It was late, wasn't it, Mr. Alone? You wanted to go home? Yes. You did not want to remain with her any longer? No, I was tired. So you left her to the Negro. I left her in the car. I didn't leave her to anybody. But the Negro was in the car. Yes. And she got in the front seat with him? Yes. And you did not try to stop her? No. And all 3 of you have been drinking? Yes. And you were satisfied to leave her like that with a drunken Negro? What do you mean? You had no fear for her? Why, no. You felt that she, being drunk, would be satisfied with anyone else as she had been with you? No, not that way. You're leading. Just answer the question. Had Miss Dalton, to your knowledge, ever had sex relations with a Negro before? No. Did you think that it would be a good time as any for her to learn? No. Didn't you promise to contact the Negro to see if he was grateful enough to join the Communist Party? I didn't say I'd contact him. Didn't you tell me you'd contact him within 2 or 3 days? No. Mr. Alone, are you sure you didn't say that? Oh, yes, but it was not with the construction you're putting upon it. Mr. Alone, were you surprised when you heard of the death of Miss Dalton? Yes. At first I was too stunned to believe it. I thought surely there was some mistake. You hadn't expected that drunken Negro to go that far, had you? I hadn't expected anything. But you told the Negro to read those communist pamphlets, didn't you? I gave them to him. You told him to read them, yes. But you didn't expect him to go so far as to rape and kill the girl? I didn't expect anything in that direction at all. That's all, Mr. Alone. Bigger watched Jan go back to his seat. He knew how Jan felt. He knew that the man had been trying to do in asking the questions. He was not only the object of hate here. What did the Reds want that made the coroner hate Jan so? Will Mr. Henry Dalton please come forward, the coroner asked. Bigger listened as Mr. Dalton told how the Dalton family always hired Negro boys as chauffeurs, especially when Negro boys were handicapped by poverty, lack of education, misfortune, or bodily injury. Mr. Dalton said that it was to give them a chance to support their families and to go to school. He told how Bigger had come over to the house, how timid and frightened he had acted, and how moved and touched the family had been for him. He told how he had not thought that Bigger had anything to do with the disappearance of Mary, and how he had told Britton not to question him. He then told of receiving the kidnap note and of how shocked he had been when he was informed that Bigger had fled his home, thereby indicating his guilt. When the coroner's questioning was over, Bigger heard Max ask, "May I direct a few questions?" "Certainly, go ahead," the coroner said. Max went forward and stood directly in front of Mr. Dalton. "You're the president of the Dalton Real Estate Company, are you not?" "Yes." "Your company owns the building in which the Thomas family has lived for the past 3 years, does it not?" "Well, no, my company owns stock in the company that owns the house." "I see. What is the name of that company?" "The Southside Real Estate Company." "Now, Mr. Dalton, the Thomas family paid you—" "Not to me. They pay rent to the Southside Real Estate Company." "You own the controlling stock in the Dalton Real Estate Company, don't you?" "Why, yes." "And that company in turn owns stock that controls the Southside Real Estate Company, doesn't it?" "Why, yes." "I think I can say that the Thomas family pays rent to you." "Indirectly, yes." "Who formulates the policies of these two companies?" "Why, I do." "Why is it that you charge the Thomas family and other Negro families more rent for the same kind of house than you charge whites?" "I don't fix the rent scales," Mr. Dalton said. "Who does?" "Why, the law of supply and demand regulates the price of houses." "Now, Mr. Dalton, it has been said that you donate millions of dollars to educate Negroes. Why is it that you exact an exorbitant rent of $8 per week from the Thomas family for one unventilated, rat-infested room in which 4 people eat and sleep?" The coroner leapt to his feet. "I'll not tolerate your browbeating the witness. Have you no sense of decency? The man is one of the most respected men in the city, and your questions have no bearing." "They do have a bearing," Max shouted. "You said we could question with latitude here. I'm trying to find the guilty person, too. Jenner Lone is not the only man who's influenced Bigger Thomas. There were many others before him. I have a much right to determine what effect their attitude has had upon his conduct as you had to determine what Jenner Lone's had." "I'm willing to answer his question if it will clear things up," Mr. Dalton said quietly. "Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Now tell me, why is it that you charge the Thomas family $8 per week for one room in a tenement?" "Well, there's a housing shortage." "All over Chicago?" "No, just here on the South Side." "You own houses in other sections of the city?" "Yes." "Then why don't you rent those houses to Negroes?" "Well, I don't think they like to live any other place." "Who told you that?" "Nobody." "You came to that conclusion yourself?" "Why, yes." "Isn't it true that you refuse to rent houses to Negroes if those houses are in the other sections of the city?" "Why, yes." "Why?" "Well, it's an old custom." "Do you think that custom is right?" "I didn't make the custom," Mr. Dalton said. "Do you think the custom is right?" Max asked again. "Well, I think Negroes are happier when they're together." "Who told you that?" "Why, nobody." "Aren't they more profitable when they're together?" "I don't know what you mean." "Mr. Dalton, does the policy of your company tend to keep Negroes on the South Side in one area?" "Well, it works that way, but I didn't originate." "Mr. Dalton, you give millions to help Negroes. May I ask why you don't charge them less rent for fire traps and check against your charity budget?" "Well, to charge them less rent would be unethical." "Unethical?" "Why, yes, I would be underselling my competitors." "Is there an agreement among realtors as to what Negroes should be charged for rent?" "No, but there's a code of ethics in business." "So the profits you take from the Thomas family in rent, you give back to them to ease the pain of their gouged lives and to salve the ache of their own conscience?" "That's a distortion of fact, sir." "Mr. Dalton, why do you contribute money to the Negro college education?" "I want to see them have a chance." "Have you ever employed any of the Negroes you helped to educate?" "Why, no." "Mr. Dalton, do you think that's a terrible condition under which the Thomas family lived in one of your houses may in some way be related to the death of your daughter?" "I don't know what you mean." "That's all," said Max. After Mr. Dalton left the stand, Peggy came, then Britton, then a host of doctors, reporters, and many policemen. "We will now hear from Bigger Thomas," the coroner called. A wave of excited voices swept over the room. Bigger's fingers gripped the arms of the chair. Max's hand touched his shoulder. Bigger turned and Max whispered, "Sit still." Max rose. "Mr. Coroner, yes. In the capacity of Bigger Thomas's lawyer, I'd like to state that he does not wish to testify here." "His testimony would help to clear up any doubt as to the cause of death of the deceased," the coroner said. "My client is already in police custody, and it is right to refuse." All right, the coroner said. Max sat down. "Stay in your seat. It's all right," Max whispered to Bigger. Bigger relaxed and felt his heart pounding. He longed for something to happen so that the white faces would stop staring at him. Finally, the faces turned away. The coroner strode to the table and lifted the kidnap note with a long, low, delicate, and deliberate gesture. "Gentlemen," he said, facing the 6 men in the rows of chairs, "you've heard the testimony of the witnesses. I think, however, that you should have the opportunity to examine the evidence gathered by the police department." The coroner gave the kidnap note to one of the jurors, who read it and passed it to the others. All the jurors examined the purse, the blood-stained knife, the blackened hatchet blade, the the communist pamphlets, the rum bottle, the trunk, and the signed confession. Owing to the peculiar nature of this crime, and owing to the fact that the deceased body was all but destroyed, I deem it imperative that you examine one additional piece of evidence. It will help shed light upon the actual manner of death of the deceased, the coroner said. He turned and nodded in the direction of the two white-coated attendants who stood at the rear door. The room was quiet. Bigger wondered how much longer it would last. He felt that he could not stand much more. Now and then the room blurred, and a slight giddiness came over him, but his muscles would flex taut, and it would pass. The hum of voices grew suddenly loud, and the coroner rapped for order. Then a commotion broke out. Bigger heard a man's voice. "Move aside, please." He looked and saw the two white-coated attendants pushing an oblong sheet-covered table through the crowd and down the aisle. "What's this?" Bigger wondered. He felt Max's hand come on his shoulder. "Take it easy, Bigger. This'll be over soon." "What are they doing?" Max asked in a tense whisper. For a long moment, Max did not answer. Then he said uncertainly, "I don't know." The oblong table was pushed to the front of the room. The coroner spoke in a deep, slow voice that was charged with passionate meaning. "As deputy coroner, I have decided in the interest of justice to offer in evidence the raped and mutilated body of one Bessie Mears and the testimony of police officers and doctors relating to the cause and manner of her death." The coroner's voice was droned out. The room was in an uproar. For 2 minutes, the police had to pound their clubs against the walls to restore order. Bigger sat still as stone as Max brushed past him and stopped a few feet from the sheet-covered table. "Mr. Coroner," Max said, "this is outrageous. Your indecent exhibition of that girl's dead body serves no purpose other than an incitement of mob violence. It will enable the jury to determine the exact manner of death of Mary Dalton, who was slain by the man who slew Bessie Mears." The coroner said in a scream that was compounded of rage and vindictiveness. "The confession of Bigger Thomas covers all evidence necessary for the jury," Max said. "You are criminally appealing to mob emotion." "That's for the grand jury to determine," the coroner said, "and you cannot interrupt these proceedings any longer. If you persist in this attitude, you'll be removed from this room. I have the legal right to determine what evidence is necessary." Slowly, Max turned and walked back to a seat, his lips a thin line, his white face, his head down. Bigger was crushed, helpless. His lips dropped wide apart. He felt frozen, numb. He had completely forgotten Bessie during the inquest of Mary. He understood what was being done. To offer the dead body of Bessie as evidence and proof that he had murdered Mary would make him appear more a monster. It would stir up more hate against him. Bessie's death had not been mentioned during the inquest, and all the white faces in the room were utterly surprised. It was not because he thought any less of Bessie that he had forgotten her, but Mary's death had caused him the most fear. Not her death itself, but what it meant to him as a Negro. They were bringing Bessie's body in now to make the white men and women feel that nothing short of a quick blotting out of his life would make the city safe again. They were using his having killed Bessie to kill him for having killed Mary, to cast him in a light that would sanction any action to destroy him. Though he had killed a black girl and a white girl, he knew that it would be for the death of the white girl that he would be punished. The black girl was merely evidence. And under it all, he knew that the white people did not really care about Bessie being killed. White people never searched for Negroes who killed other Negroes. He'd even heard it said that white people felt it was good when one Negro killed another. It meant they had one less Negro to contend with. Crime for a Negro was only when he harmed whites, took white lives, or injured white property. As time passed, he could not help looking and listening to what was going on in the room. His eyes rested wistfully on the still oblong white drape formed under the sheet on the table, and he felt a deeper sympathy for Bessie than at any time when she was alive. He knew that Bessie, too, though dead, though killed by him, would resent her dead body being used in this way. Anger quickened in him, an old feeling that Bessie had often described to him when she had come from long hours of hot toil in the white folks' kitchen, a feeling of being forever commanded by others so much that thinking and feeling for oneself was impossible. Not only had he lived where they told him to live, not only had he done what they told him to do, not only had he done these things until he had killed to be quit of them, but even after obeying, after killing, they still ruled him. He was their property, heart, body, soul, and blood. What they did, he claimed every atom, sleeping and waking. It colored life and dictated the terms. The coroner rapped for order and stepped back to the table, and with one sweep of his arm flung back the sheet from Bessie's body. The sight, bloody and black, made Bigger flinch involuntarily and lift his hand to his eyes. And at the same instant he saw blinding flashes of silver bulbs flicking through the air. His eyes looked with painful effort to the back of the room, for he felt that if he saw Bessie again, he would rise from his chair and sweep his arm in an attempt to blot out the room and the people in it. Every nerve in his body helped him to stare without seeing and to sit amid the noise without hearing. A pain came in from the front of his head, right above his eyes. As the slow minutes dragged, his body was drenched in cold sweat. His blood throbbed in his ears. His lips were parched and dry. He wanted to wet them with his tongue, but could not. The tense effort to keep out of the conscious the terrible sight of Bessie and the drone of the voices would not allow him to move a single muscle. He sat still, surrounded by an invisible cast of concrete. Then he could hold out no longer. He bent forward and buried his face in his hands. He heard a faraway voice speaking from a great height. The jury will retire to the next room. Bigger lifted his head and saw the 6 men rise and file out through the rear door. The sheet had been pulled over Bessie's body, and he could not see her. The voices in the room grew loud, and the coroner rapped for order. The 6 men filed slowly back to their chairs. One of them gave the coroner a slip of paper. The coroner rose, lifted his hand for silence, and read a long string of words that Bigger could not understand, but he caught phrases. The said Mary Dalton came to her death in the bedroom of her home, located at 4605 Drexel Boulevard, from suffocation and strangulation due to external violence. Said violence received when the deceased was choked by the hands of one Bigger Thomas during the course of criminal rape. We, the jury, believe that the said occurrence was murder and recommend that said Bigger Thomas be held to the grand jury on a charge of murder until released by due process of law. The voice droned on, but Bigger did not listen. This meant that he was going to jail, to stay there until tried and executed. Finally, the coroner's voice stopped. The room was full of noise. Bigger heard men and women walking past him. He looked about like a man waking from a deep sleep. Max had hold of his arm. Bigger, he turned his head slightly. I'll see you tonight. They're taking you to the Cook County Jail. I'll come there and talk things over with you. We'll see what can be done. Meanwhile, take it easy. As soon as you can, lie down and get some sleep. Here. Max left him. He saw 2 policemen wheeling Bessie's body back through the door. The 2 policemen who sat to either side of him took his arms and locked his wrist to theirs. 2 more policemen stood in front of him, and 2 more back. Come on, boy. The policeman walked ahead, making a path for him in the dense crowd. As he passed white men and women, they were silent, but as soon as he was some feet away, he heard their voices rise. They took him out of the front door into the hall. He thought that they were going to take him back upstairs, and he made a motion to go in the direction of the elevator, but they jerked him back roughly. This way. They led him out of the front door of the building to the street. Yellow sunshine splashed the sidewalks and buildings. A huge throng of people covered the pavement. The wind blew hard. Out of the shrill pitch of shouts and screams, he caught a few distinct words. Turn him loose. Give him what they gave that girl. Let us take care of him. Burn that black ape. A narrow aisle was cleared for him to cross the width of the pavement to the waiting car. As far as he could see, there were blue-coated white men and bright silver stars shining on their chests. They wedged him tightly in the backseat of the car between the 2 policemen to whom he was handcuffed. The motor throbbed. Ahead he saw a car swing out from the curb and roll with screaming siren down the street through the sunshine. Another followed it, then 4 more. At the last car in which he sat, fell in behind lined them. Back of him he heard another car pulling out from the curb with throbbing motors and shrieking sirens. He looked at the passing buildings out of the south side, but could not recognize any of the familiar landmarks. To each side of him were peering white faces with open mouths. Soon, however, he knew he was heading southward. The siren screamed so loud that he seemed to be riding in a wave of sound. The car swerved onto State Street. At 35th Street, the neighborhood became familiar. At 37th Street, he knew the 2 blocks to the left was his home. What were his mother and brother and sister doing now? And where were Jack and G.H. and Gus? The rubber tires sang over the flat asphalt. There was a policeman at every corner waving the cars on. Where were they taking him? Maybe they're going to keep him in jail on the south side? Maybe they're taking him to the Hyde Park police station? They reached 47th Street and rolled eastward toward Cottage Grove Avenue. Then they came to Drexel Boulevard and swung north again. He stiffened and leaned forward. Mr. Dalton lived on this street. What were they going to do with him? The car slowed and stopped directly in front of the Dalton gate. What were they bringing him here for? He looked at the brick house, drenched in sunshine, still quiet. He looked in the faces of the 2 policemen who sat to either side of him. They were staring silently ahead. Upon the sidewalk to the front and rear of him were long lines of policemen with drawn guns. White faces filled the apartment windows all around him. People were pouring out of doors, running toward the Dalton home. A policeman with a gold star on his chest came to the door of the car, opened it, and glanced at him briefly, then turned to the driver. Okay, boys, take him out. They led him to the curb. Already a solidly packed crowd stood all over the sidewalks, the streets, on lawns, and behind the lines of the policemen. He heard a white boy yell, "There's the one that killed Miss Mary." They led him through the gate, down the walk, up the steps. They stood a second facing the front of the Dalton home, the same door before which he had stood so humbly with his cap in his hand as little less than a week ago. The door opened, and he was led down the hall to the rear stairs and up to the second floor to the door of Mary's room. It seemed that he could not breathe. What did they bring him here for? His body was once more wet with sweat. How long could he stand without collapsing again? They led him in the room. It was crowded with armed policemen and newspapermen ready with their bulbs. He looked around. The room was just as he had seen it that night. There was the bed upon which he had smothered Mary. The clock with the glowing dial stood on the small dresser. The same curtains were at the windows, and the shades were still far up as they had been that night when he had stood near them and had seen Miss Dalton in flowing white grope her way slowly into the dark blue room with her hands lifted before her. He felt the rush of the men upon him, and his body stiffened, flushing hot with shame and anger. The man with the golden star on his chest came and spoke to him in a low, soft tone. "Now, Bigger, be a good boy. Just relax and take it easy. We want you to take your time and show us what happened that night, see? And don't mind the boys taking pictures. Just go through the motions you went through that night." Bigger glared. His whole body tightened, and he felt that he was going to rise another foot in height. "Come on," the man said. "Nobody's going to hurt you. Don't be afraid."